In this video, we'll learn everything about stereo field. Where does it come from? What is it? How can we monitor it? And especially how can we manipulate it? And what are kind of like the caveats which we should avoid? And also there are some free tools in the video which you can download. So check this video out till the end. So why do we perceive a difference in stereo field? Because we have two ears, and now imagine there's one sound closer to the left ear. What does this actually mean? It means that it travels faster to the left ear than to the right ear. So there's a difference in timing. But there's also a difference in volume, because if it has to travel faster or if it has to bounce back from a wall first, then it will take more time to reach our right ear. And also there's a difference in frequency, because let's imagine the sound reaches our left ear directly, but to reach our right ear, it either needs to go through our body or bounce back from a wall. Then the frequencies may get kind of like transferred a bit. So for example, low frequencies usually are harder to absorb than high frequencies. And those things can also change the perception. And our brain kind of like calculates all this together and then gives us a stereo perception from it and decides, okay, the sound must be more on the left or on the right side. So how can we get actually information about our stereo field? So the first thing obviously is listening. And I think it's actually the most important tool you cannot neglect, because everybody is kind of like looking for monitoring tools, and we will talk about them in a second. But the most important thing is actually your ears, because you're sitting in the control room and feeling how the sound is. Is it like distributed like on the left and on the right side? Is everything centered, or do you have things on the side? So that's things you can actually feel and listen to. And if you really focus your listening on that, then you will definitely notice a difference if something is wider or less wide, and if it's in a good position. So don't ignore that, because that is your most important tool. But I know that you guys want to go more into monitoring. But before we do that, have a quick listen to this section. So we have different sounds kind of like positioned differently. For example, the kick and bass is dead center here. Also my drums are very centered. And then we have this sound which is moving a little bit more fast in the space. And then we have that FM thing which moved, I think, a little bit slower in the space. And kind of like all those elements build a relationship which you can hear, and which, to be honest, is a little bit more difficult to figure out with tools. So what's really important when listening with your ears, that you are aware of certain effects. So for example, the volume really matters. You should listen at different volumes, your mix, because whenever you have a different volume, a lot of things can change. So for example, our listening changes with the volume. Here on the y-axis, you have the sound pressure level, so how loud your sound is. And on the x-axis, you have the frequency. And you can see at different levels, we perceive frequencies differently. So especially here, you can see with the blue and the red line crossing here, that this can make even more drastic effects at certain levels. And not only that, also our speakers and how they can reproduce sound get influenced by the loudness. And then lastly, also the room reflections. So you get different reflections with different loudness. And as we mentioned, room reflections can also change how you perceive the stereo field. Because let's say your sound is very stereo in a certain frequency, but your room kind of like kills that or exaggerates that. That can also make a difference. Or let's say you have a left-right difference in your room, and then you get the reflections differently. That can also have an influence. So all of those things can have an influence. And besides that, we also don't look at sounds in isolation. So we have like multiple sounds in our mix, so we can get masking effects. So that's all things you need to be aware of when you want to make your stereo mix. But let's have a look at the tools as well. Did you ever dream of playing your music at a party and people coming afterwards towards you and telling you what a cool set you played? That exactly happened many times to me with my own music, and I'm really proud that I reached this level, and I want to help you to achieve the same thing. If you want to learn from A to Z everything about my production, which will help you to get releases, which will help you to get charted or play your own music at parties, then you can sign up for my new course. It's a masterclass which tells you everything about my production from A to Z, and which will help you to get release ready. So you find a link above here or in the description box below, and I hope to see you in my course. As I know that you guys want to have something visual, we will look at monitoring it. And my first tool which I use mostly in my mix is the span, and I put it in the master channel. And if we would, for example, solo this sound now, and listen again, we can see that there is a difference in left-right. As you remember, stereo comes from differences coming in our left and our right ear. And we can basically see the stereo if this is not like a flat line moving up and down, but if you have like a difference in the left and the right channel. So for example, this is already an indicator of stereo which we have here in the span analyzer, but there's more. You can route this differently to mid-side stereo, and then you will get exactly what is kind of like centered here from the sound and what portion is on the sides. So if we play this again, and I usually look that my sounds have less side information than the mid information, at least if it's like a main element, like a lead like this. If I have effects, I am not scared at all to put it like completely left and completely right, and or change it from left to right. That's, I think, a little bit up to your production, but you have actually more information. You have the correlation meter here, which we'll talk later about. But to be honest, it's not the best tool to look at stereo information. There's a better one, and for that use case, I created this beautiful saw wave in Serum, which is dead centered. So it's only in the center at the moment, and this tool is from Voxengo MSED, and it's pretty cool actually because it has a lot of these things in here which you can use to measure your stereo properties. So for example, it has this nice goniometer, and it shows if it's completely mono, then you have a vertical line here. So check this out. So if we change the balance now from center to completely left, then we would see our line here tilted to the left. And if we have it completely on the right side, it's tilted to the right. So far, that easy. So that's basically how this thing reads. And there's one more position, and it's like a horizontal line. And this is if your sound is completely out of phase. So we could, for example, take our signal here, split it into a left and right channel. So we have now one completely left and one completely right. Then we will need to bring it out of phase by placing another utility here, and we will be flipping the phase here. Then we have a signal which is completely out of phase, and it will cancel out if we would bring it to mono. Because now, whenever we have an up in our wave, we have on the right side, for example, we have like a down in the wave on the left side, and vice versa. And if we sum those, so if we kind of like sum all plus ones with all minus ones, we get like 0. So basically, if we put a mono here, it won't result in any signal. That's a perfect phase cancellation. So that's actually how you would read this thing. And there's actually one more, and this is the correllometer. Also a very useful tool when you want to evaluate the stereo wideness of your sounds, because as you have seen now, if this is completely -1, we get like a complete phase cancellation in mono from the sound. And that's something you usually want to avoid. So you're safe as long as you are, let's say, from 0 to 1 here on the right side, but I say I'm not scared to have sounds which kind of like occasionally bounce lower than the 0. But if you want to be completely safe, you can check that you are only on this side. So to sum this quickly up, avoid being on -1. You can be on +1 if you want to be completely mono. So for example, like a bass can be completely mono. And otherwise, you're good if you're between like 0 and 1. And the closer you're basically getting here, usually the more wider your sound gets. I want to show you one more thing here in the MSAD, and for that we need to already dive into the first technique, how to manipulate phases. As I said, we want to create a left-right difference. So I quickly brought another Voxengo tool here, the phaser line. With that one, you can basically not only flip the phases, but you can rotate them. As mentioned in the beginning, in a mono signal, all the phases are aligned from the left and the right side. Whenever our speaker moves out on the left side, the speaker on the right side moves out, and so on. So if you imagine also like a wave, like a sine wave, whenever the left side is on the top, then the right side is on the top as well. And we can change this by rotating one of the phases here, and then you will get also an interesting result here. So check this out. Also have an eye on the correllometer. So we have rotated them 90 degrees. We get this nice circle here, and we get like a perfect 0 here on the correllometer. And I think you have the sound on your computer. If you don't hear it stereo, then maybe you want to use headphones, but you see what it does to the sound and you see what it does in here. So let's recap one more time, because our ears are making the perception for the stereo field. So that's actually the tools we can then use. We can make stereo field with delays. We can make stereo field with volumes. Then there are like psychoacoustic effects. So that's everything kind of like which leverages how our brain processes stereo fields. And there's even more. There's like head related transfer functions for binaural listening. And I won't get deep into that because there are like VSTs for that. And also it's more for headphones, I guess. Anyways, we will have a look at different options now, how we can tweak our sound and make it more stereo. There's other techniques as well. We can place just like a simple EQ point and stereo place it to the left, and we already created like a left and right difference in a certain frequency spectrum, and that's something interesting you can also see in here. So check this out. If I would place it to the right, you would see it on the other side. And we can exaggerate this by creating like a second point and placing it on the other side. So like this. Then it gets bigger. When I move this, as it's like different frequencies, you will also see a different result in here. I know it's not the most beautiful sound to do this, but I want to have like a simple sound, because if there's like a million things going on, it might be a little bit different to perceive things. And obviously you can also automate this. So I did this one time, I think with a vocal, that I automated this left and right points just by hand, like by moving them here. So you can either move them together or like separately, which can also create some nice effects. So that's simple. You can already introduce some stereo in your mix, but let's look at more things. There's another free tool here. It's called Wider. I guess most of you guys know it, and I use it a lot, and I like to use it a lot. And usually I find the best settings are somewhere like between like 30 and maybe like 100 or 130, but I don't usually go like that high here. So check this out. How the algorithm behind it works, I don't know exactly, but I'm sure there's some videos, and you can even kind of like low pass it to keep the lows mono here. And here you can also listen to it back in mono. That's a very simple and free tool I use a lot for creating a stereo field. Another one is a simple auto pan. You can just put the amount in here, so how much you want to push it to the sides and how fast, so how fast it cycles through here, and also the phase, so how much they are shifted here, the left and the right phase. And then this kind of like runs like an automation through it. So if we play it, you will see it moves here. You can also have the rate BPM synced. And you can select different shapes for it. So that's also a pretty cool tool, in my opinion, to make stereo very easy. And I use it a lot on lead synths. And I usually even automate the rate here. So you can place a little LFO in here, and then it modulates the rate. And you can get some interesting interactions out of that. Another pretty simple thing, which is quite similar to the autopan, is if you put a ping pong delay on a sound which is very mono. I do that a lot with acid sounds, so check this out. Completely mono, and then we add the ping pong. Another technique is the Haas effect, which is delaying one side of the signal. So we put this here to time mode. We decouple this so that we can have one side different to the other. And then we need to set it between like 5 and 35 milliseconds. So let's put this on 35. Now we put the feedback down. I put the filter out, and we need to put it on 100% wet. So this falls more in the psychoacoustic and delay-based effects. And then we have the utility here, which also can be really nice because you can either select like only the left or right channel. So let's say maybe your signal is too much on one side, and you can kind of like correct it and just make it mono again by selecting one side. That's kind of like an option where you can undo basically a wrong stereo thing. And also you can push it wider or less wide, but this requires that it also already has some wideness. So check this out. Nothing happens. But if we have, for example, this. Then we can make it even wider. But to be honest, I don't use that much because I don't like usually how it sounds. But you can also put this to mid-side mode. And then you have a similar tool like the MSED, so you can push it more to the sides. Or make it more centered. And this is pretty cool actually if you start stacking it and grouping it. Because then you have two different knobs. So we can basically duplicate this here. And then we could have our one on the mid and one on the sides. And we can basically mix this in. And there's actually more, because we have now talked about a lot of basic techniques, but you can bring this to the next level. So with one technique, I have already shown this, but you can make not your whole signal wider, but just parts of it. So everything I showed you, like the phase rotation or the wider, you can also apply only to certain parts of your signal. So for example, we could multiband split our signal first with, for example, a simple tool like the EQ3. So we group this, define the split point you want to have. So for example, let's say we only want to make it more stereo from 300 to 7 kilohertz. Then you start duplicating this. And if you want to make this a little bit more reusable, then we can map this low frequency, this one, and this one to this knob. And we can map also our high frequencies to this knob. And of course, we need to do it like this, that we turn off the other two here. And we keep here this one, and we keep that one. And now we have one thing which is only like the low band, which we can control here. One which is the mid, which is basically everything in between here, and one thing which is our high band here. And if we just want to affect our mid frequencies, we can just place this inside here. So here in the mids. And then we can, for example, just phase rotate our mid signal. So we could say only this. Or we just want to auto pan our mid signal. Be aware, the more you be fancy with all those techniques, also you run a higher risk, I guess, into screwing things up really badly. But just saying, like, that's options. You can basically do spectral panning, so you can just affect certain bands, or maybe even just like a certain frequency you want to correct by selecting them with just wrapping it up into another layer and then applying all the effects just in that layer. And a similar thing we can also do, instead of having it in bands, we can also process our left and right signal differently. So if we, for example, take this rack here again, and I will upload you all the racks into my Gumroad for free, so you can download them from there. I will put a link in the description box. And now what we can do with that to create a difference, as you remember, the difference is what makes the stereo. We can also put just an effect to one side. So we could, for example, put an overdrive maybe to one side. And this will also create some stereo. I'm not sure where I would exactly use this like this, but just saying, like, you have like a million options to recombine that, and you could even like combine the band split with the left-right split if you want to go really crazy. But be aware, maybe sometimes simple is better than crazy, and you can reach a lot of things with very easy techniques, and sometimes better than if you put like 100 plugins on that and use the most fancy technique to do stuff. So for example, in my production, I usually use the wide roll and the auto pan like 90% of the time. Then besides that, we also have the option to do it here in the mixer. So you can put the complete signal which is going out of this chain either to the left or to the right. Or you can even here select split stereo pan mode. And what you can do here, you have the left side of the signal and the right side of the signal, and you can adjust like the stereo position of that. So you can even put like the left part of the signal also on the right side. But to be honest, I don't use that much because I like it more if the sound is not on one side, but rather kind of like on both. So as I mentioned, you not only have like left and right, but also like mid and sides. And I usually have it rather like on the sides, because then let's imagine you have a big festival and there's like a speaker on the left and the right side. Then if you just panel to the left, then people on the right side might not be able to hear it as good. But if you have something which, for example, like the auto pan rotates the sound around the room, then you get at least like parts of it. And I think it's a better solution. And also the wider, I think, makes it also more on both sides. I don't know the exact algorithm behind it, but you can hear it on both sides of your headphones. And that's, in my opinion, a better sign to do stuff is if you have it like this. Where I actually use this is with effects, and then I usually do it like this. So I go like really crazy so that I put them sometimes completely hard pan to one side, and then, for example, you can scale them like this, and then they come closer. And let's say you have your drop here and the effect starts coming in here, then you can have this like left right thing, and then it goes to the center in the end. So I think that's a very nice use case for this little guy here. But we have only looked at the mix level, and we can also do this in the synthesizer already. So for example, the Unison is a method how you can increase the whiteness. So it's basically creating like multiple instances of the signal and detunes them. It kind of like multiplies the signal here of that oscillator and gives them all like slightly different pitches. And a pitch is basically how fast you cycle through a wave. So if you have, for example, a pitch at 1 octave and then you have a pitch at 1 octave higher, then it would be double that fast. I mean, the differences aren't that crazy because then it would sound like super ugly. But you can basically make it wider by having more unison and more detuning that. But it also gets pretty ugly at some point. So usually I don't have that too crazy, and you add a few more voices here. And then you get like a nice stereo thing. And of course you can design also the synthesis to have it a difference in left right. So for example, we could have 2 waves here, 1 panned completely left and 1 panned completely right. And we could give them here different phases, as with the phase rotation tool we had before. We could have different waves in here. There's so many options what we can actually do to make differences in here. We can have maybe a different fine pitch here, which is also a bit like the detuning here. So you have like plenty of options to create that. I mean, the main thing you need to remember is how your ears function. So by having a different timing, by having a different volume, and maybe having a different frequency distribution. And if you know that, then all you need to do is you need to apply one or multiple of those 3 things to your left-right signal, and you get a left-right difference, which results in a stereo image. And then the main thing you need to remember after that is that you need to listen closely if that sounds like crap and that your tools are not completely freaking out. So if you're like 100% on -1 and it sounds cool in your room, maybe there's still something wrong with it. And there's an easy trick some people use, but I think you should also use it with care, because you can sum your master channel then to mono again, as we have done before when we created that flat line here. And if it doesn't completely disappear, I would personally don't care so much about it, because I think a good mix is rather very stereo in our genre, because we have all those freaky spacey sounds wobbling around, than having like a super boring 100% mono-compatible mix. So I would say it's a balance between how much you can express yourself with what you do in your mix and your sound design, and what in the end is the kind of like the completely correct way to do things. So I would just like use your ears mainly, you know, and then like listen on a lot of different devices. So maybe on headphones, on speakers, in your car, at a friend's place, and just see how it works out. Play your track maybe on a few club systems before you release it, and then have a friend maybe on the dance floor telling you how it sounds or where it lacked, and use that rather than having it perfectly on all tools and maybe you didn't reach what you wanted to express with your sound. Anyways, I don't want you to forget there are different dimensions in your mix. It's not only the stereo, the left and right, there's also ups and downs. So frequencies, how your frequencies are distributed, and also the depth of field. So how far or how close sounds are is also really important. And you can control that, for example, with volume, delays and reverbs, but that's a little bit out of the scope of this video. But you should never forget, it's not only this one thing which determines your mix. And the pro tip is that you usually get the best results if you have a great contrast in your mix. So imagine you have a group of people, like a very small guy and a very big guy, and then you have all the guys in between and you line them up by size. Then it's not so obvious that the one guy is really small and the other one is like a huge monster guy, as if you just put them next to each other and kind of like skipped everything in between. And same I see is true for mixes as well. If you have like perfectly balanced everything like gradually out in your mix, then this can also sometimes result in a less wide mix than if you just make like huge contrasts. So for example, in my mixes, the kick and bass drums are quite centered, and then I have like this really wide leads, which in my opinion make then a wider perception. Or if I want to get like an effects really wide, then I try to have my sounds very centered, and then I pan it like hard left, hard right, and kind of like as we have seen in that example where it moves towards that center. So I think those things can really help you. And in the end, you always need to find a balance between everything. But if you want to exaggerate something, sometimes it can help to really make the difference very large. If you want to learn more about mixing Psytrance leads, you can watch this video next. And if you want to go even deeper, if you want to know everything from A to Z, how to create a really professional grade track, then you can check out my new masterclass. You find a link in the description box below, and it will really help you to make your music release ready. So check this out, and it will improve your music big time, as I have seen on my current students, and I hope to see you in the course.